They punished me by marrying me off to a woman they said was worth $5. Yeah, that happened. And if you think it sounds like a bar joke, you've never stood in a room so hot with judgment the door won't close. Ravensford Courthouse was chipped paint and warped wood. Every ranch hand and gossip in town came to watch what the law did to a man who shot the wrong steer. I stood there with my hat in my hands, thinking about salt, rope, and how fast a day can tilt. One bad shot did it. Old rifle, wandering beef, crack, collapse, silence that makes you sober. And Leland Cobb wanted money I didn't have or a cell I couldn't risk because my horses would be gone. The judge went looking for a lesson he could point to, and they brought her in barefoot with rope burns bright on her wrists, tall and straight, deerskin torn at the shoulder. I said yes because there wasn't another door that didn't slam on both of us, and she said yes so quiet a man could pretend he didn't hear and still sign the paper. We walked out without touching. Noon light hard on the street. The town stare like grit under a bandage, and I pointed us toward my place a mile past the last fence line, because if the sentence was going to be a spectacle, the rest of it wouldn't be. She didn't ask for promises. I didn't offer any I couldn't keep. The cabin was one room and honest, stone chimney, lean-to, a corral with a bay gelding and a roan that tested everybody's patience. You take the bed, I said, and meant it. Let me back up a sec. There's a thing I hadn't told a soul in this county, and it wanted out the moment she sat in my house. I'd scouted for the Army at 19 because steady pay feels like forgiveness when you don't own land or a future. I read ground and pointed men into canyons where families hid. I told myself I was the map, not the fire, until the smoke made that lie choke me. That's why I was here, done with orders. She watched me, and when I said I wasn't like those men, she said, "Not yet," and left it there. Days settle if you let them. The roan didn't like hands until Naya stood at her shoulder and spoke so low the horse leaned to hear it. Inside she cleaned with a care that said home is something you claim one square at a time, and by evening the room smelled of beans and wild onion from the creek. Flour doesn't appear by wishing, nails don't grow on trees, so we rode into town and tied off at the Mercantile. Brogan Pike, shirt open, and the heat went out of his smile. You know what I mean? The twist came the next day on the south fence where the storekeeper's boy had a rope looped over my roan's neck. "Didn't know she was yours," he said, eyes sliding toward Naya like he was shopping, and before I could correct him she took the rope like a burr off a sleeve. I realized she wasn't just surviving my life. She was drawing her own lines inside it. A thing like ours can't live private and survive public. So a week later we went back to the courthouse with the same peeled paint. I told Judge Merrick to dissolve the restitution and record a marriage by choice. Hers and mine, clean. What comes after looks small from a distance and feels like everything up close. Mornings with coffee and the tap of a knife on a tin cup, her herbs pushing green behind the cabin. Afternoons fixing posts while wind carries the smell of a storm you may or may not get. Evenings under the same blanket with the distance not forced or worshipped, just honest. I traded for a plain brass ring and slid it on her hand by the hearth. It caught a line of light and made the room look finished. People ask how a man like me changes, like there's a trick. There isn't. You run out of lies about who you helped and who you hurt, and someone looks you in the face and says, "Not yet," and doesn't blink while you prove it. The morning she came out with her hair unbraided, took the second axe without asking, and split wood beside me until the pile was high. That's what mercy looks like when it stays. If you came for gunfire and galloping, for the valley to split and swallow the town, I'll disappoint you. The ending I have is quieter and, to me, braver. A sky turned honey by dust. Two horses dozing. The door still warped, but closing more than it used to. Her laugh at something small, because she finally had room for laughter. The judge's paper under a coffee tin instead of on a nail. Wind running a soft hand across grass like it was blessing us without saying so. I won't lie, there's a ledger I can't balance. Tracks I laid that led men to houses like the one Naya once called hers, and rings don't erase maps. So when somebody nods at us in town, I wonder what they're nodding at. Our stubbornness, our luck. Their relief the spectacle ended quietly, or the fact that two people turned a sentence into a life. Maybe that's all justice gets out here. Not clean, not complete. Just two voices louder than the crowd. So I'll leave you on the porch with the light catching dust like slow snow, A garden trying hard in bad soil. A town that learns slow. And us. Hands not chained by paper but bound by promise. Standing in a doorway that almost closes and might fit right someday if we keep planing it. If you were in that courtroom, gavel, paper, or just the stare, what would you have done? Was the judge rough but fair? Was the crowd the real sentence? Did we fix a wrong or write a new one we'll be paying off for years? Drop your thoughts below. Right and wrong, punishment and choice, how a town decides who belongs, and whether turning a punishment into a home is redemption or just the best kind of defiance. I'm reading, and I'm not scared of the hard answers. I opened the door that morning and found a paper nailed to the wood like a black beetle, notice of reclamation. My wife's name written beneath it, as if she were an item in a ledger. My heart skipped wrong once. And out on the road the deputy's horse scraped a hoof, while farther off a bugle line from some old memory I tried to bury went thin through the air. You know what I mean. Two men stood under the eave, Deputy Samuels and a narrow fellow in a felt hat with hands pale as flour. He introduced himself as Thaddeus Finch, federal Indian agent. Flipped open a book and said in a voice that smelled like salve, "Under federal authority, the individual known as Naya is to be remanded to agency custody. Local marriage papers to be reviewed thereafter." He said individual, but he looked like he meant property. I told him to wait in the yard, brought the paper inside, handed it to Naya. Promised nothing except to keep a free person off a rope until we get the law right. Finch smiled the way a man smiles when he's already counted the votes and said they had 24 hours. Left the hall scented with cheap perfume and a low laugh to share with Samuels, loud enough for the hallway to hear. On the way home we met a convoy at the Willow Bridge, tarped wagons. A few native men and women shackled to one chain for neatness, and the sight of it made my stomach turn because I knew that shape of a line too well. Just when I meant to look away, an old woman raised her head, eyes clear as river ice, aimed clean through me, said a single word in her language. And even if you don't speak it, you can read a word that strikes bone. Naya stopped dead. I could hear her breath change, and I knew it wasn't Finch or iron that did it. It was that gaze. A shaft pinning an old map to the wall. Let me back up a sec, I told myself. But there isn't any backing up when you're standing on a narrow bridge with a chain of people crossing it. That night the wind turned pages in the grass like somebody going through a file, and I told everything. The night I led a company into a valley because I read Cold Ash and Old Hoof Rings. The ember I pretended I hadn't seen. The way a child's cry travels when the wind shifts. How I called myself a map and not the fire until the smoke made that lie choke me. She sat still, hand on the table, thumb touching a scar in the wood like she was reminding herself to stay. You can tell it true or tell it pretty. Fire is still fire, she said, not accusing. Just laying the words down between us. I nodded. Maybe it was the first time I didn't defend myself. In the morning, she said, we go back to court. I'll speak in my voice. Main Street felt like a market fair the next day. News travels faster than wind when a town smells spectacle. Merrick let the room settle and struck the gavel. Finch presented bill and witness, hoisted a yellowed paper with a fat line that said bill of sale like a brand new rope. Pre-existing contract. And she's a person, not a contract. Finch shrugged one shoulder. We are speaking of federal jurisdiction. Merrick looked at him and said slow. We're speaking of a person standing in my county. Here's the twist. The door opened, and the old woman from the bridge came in under escort as the government's witness. They called her White Lark on their paper. And let the crowd's noise rush and break, because sometimes you have to let the storm crawl over your bones. I was there, I said. I left because I couldn't stand the silence after the screaming stopped. There isn't an apology big enough, but I'm standing here, and if anyone wants a sell for me, I'll go. Just don't call my wife merchandise again. You know that feel when something snaps and something else clicks into the right notch. Naya stood, didn't ask leave. I am Naya, she said. I stand here because I choose this man, not because court papers told me to. Agent Finch can carry his paper to every county in this territory. But if he drags me from my husband today, he drags a free woman in front of all our neighbors. And what will you tell your children tonight? He waited for recess, stepped onto the porch. Not property. Huh. So what do we trade for? He didn't finish because Halden the blacksmith's sledge sang through the air and landed on the step in front of his boot like a serious suggestion. "Enough," Halden said, one hand still on the haft. A couple of men with shirts smoked gray stood behind him, not loud, just that steady quiet that sobers a drunk. "You boys can laugh inside," Halden added. "Out here we got to live on the same street." First time I'd seen Brogan look for allies and find mostly men who didn't want the job, while the porch went quiet, which meant Finch had to ride his wagons out of the county unless he brought a bigger seal. Finch rolled his eyes like a man counting short change. Samuel studied his own badge as if it had new letters. Whitelark looked at Naya and moved her head once, not at Naya, but at history, then looked at me again. "Not forgiveness, not another cut. I'll be at the camp below the ridge," she said. "My people still light fires at sundown." I heard it like a smoke message sent straight through time. Slid it back on her finger, not to file a paper, just so I had something right and heavy in my hand when I held hers. "Tomorrow," I said, "I'll take salt, cornmeal, medicine down to Whitelark." Naya nodded. "I'm coming," she said, not a question, a line drawn. Morning sky looked like a thin sheet of metal, and the light scraped the ground flat. The camp, 3 hide tents by a string of wagons, smelled of smoke the way a sad song smells. Children peeked over the edge of a flap and vanished. I set the bag down. Whitelark didn't thank in words. She touched the salt like checking a pulse and spoke to Naya in a run of soft sounds like water through rock. I caught stray pieces, "Sister alive. North." Enough to know our story didn't start at the courthouse and wouldn't end there either. We were turning to go when we saw a dust plume to the west. Thin smoke of its own, not cook fire. "Custody to remain local, federal review pending." Reads like winning a round with paper and losing one with miles. I handed it to Naya. She folded it once, tucked it into her dress. "Then we have a month to teach this town how to look," she said, and I laughed for the first time in weeks. Father Collins stopped at the eave with a basket of his wife's bread, read scripture about yokes and chains, and looked up at me on that verse. I nodded like a man who knows a debt a man can't pay. Thunder mumbling far out. Brogan and 2 boys blocked the willow bridge, his palm resting on a grip, the old river smell mixed with whiskey. "County may protect her," he said, "but this bridge belongs to the people," which is what men say when they want to dress a private hunger in a community coat. I stepped down, hands clear. Naya didn't move back. Stood shoulder to shoulder, and before I had to pick a sentence, the roan took a half step forward like she knew where the line was, and that nearly made me smile. Halden appeared behind us. Sledge on a sling, 2 more men fanned out. Then Samuels came too, not for love of me, but because he didn't want to write bloodshed in his report. "Go home, Pike," the deputy said. Rain laying the grass flat. Inside the fire went small. We sat on the floor and watched a thin run of water track through a seam in the planks, not mad about it. Because the things that run under sometimes keep you from burning down. I put the federal notice beside Merrick's order, 2 blades with different handles. I knew the month ahead wouldn't be quiet. Fort Alden doesn't do choice in its vocabulary, but I also knew the town had shifted a half inch, not into sainthood, just into a place where a few more men would stand when someone tried to borrow the word law to do a mean thing. Tonight's tidy ending is simple. The bridge still stands, no irons clanging on wood. Naya's ring catches a slip of flame, and she laughs because the wild cat we've been coaxing finally chooses the porch and stays. But the open ending is as plain as that thin smoke on the far horizon. Could be federal riders. Could be news from the north with a name we're waiting to hear. Could be Brogan collecting the last of his pride for one more try. When you live by choices instead of papers, you learn every sunrise is another court without a gavel. Only eyes meeting and decisions about where to stand. Tell me what you make of it. What should a town defend first? Orders mailed from far away or the near voice of a free neighbor? Can a confession ever be the start of justice, or is it just fresh paint on an old wall? And when law moves slower than conscience? Justice or compromise? What do you choose when you're standing in your own doorway and a column of smoke is lifting in the west?